Senator Adams, welcome back, and you are recognized to open the debate.
Thank you, Mr. President. I missed you all. The Senate Bill 1130 is something that probably looks familiar because this bill came through both bodies last year. It has only had some minor changes, but a quick summary of what it does is it says that no entity in the state of Idaho, no business entity, can discriminate against or discriminate by deciding whether the COVID-19 shot of any kind, it can't be a requirement for employment as a term of employment or services rendered or access to facilities. And I'm going to, since we all probably know what this bill about is, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about the past because this has something to do with something that we're not dealing with as much now, but it was very prevalent recently. So a year ago, I and several other members of this body sat down with business leaders from across the state. We worked diligently to protect our citizens from unnecessary hardship and coercion due to the vaccine mandates being put in place by some members of the business community. We reached a compromise with only a few businesses still screaming that they had the right to dictate all terms to their employees. They bemoaned the idea of the state stepping in on behalf of the citizens, saying that the state had no right to tell them what they could or could not require. Isn't the state supposed to maintain a light touch when it comes to the private sector? Why are we, the legislature, so defensive, or me, but I think it's the legislature too, this came through both bodies last year. Why are we so sensitive about this one issue? Well, I'm happy to share why I am so sensitive about this issue and why it's so important for the citizens of Idaho that this legislation does, in fact, become law. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Our founding documents, our Constitution and Bill of Rights, were not created for non-living entities. They were made for people. And that to protect these rights given by God, governments were instituted among men. And that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it. That's from the Declaration of Independence. For the sake of time, I will not delineate on life and the pursuit of happiness, although it can be argued that they are also relevant as it pertains to the COVID-19 pandemic. And I'll instead discuss and focus my attention on liberty. Without liberty, we are no republic, but instead slaves in one big nationalized corporation. Webster's dictionary defines liberty as the power to do as one pleases, or freedom from arbitrary or despotic control, and defines self-determination as the free choice of one's own acts without external coercion or compulsion. The founders themselves, who penned our most sacred documents, acted on their liberty and self-determination to establish this shining city on a hill. Now, many associate the shining city on the hill with Ronald Reagan, but Governor and Minister John Winthrop of Massachusetts first cast this vision for our country almost 150 years before our independence. Liberty and self-determination, these two words are tied together throughout our country's history, which is truly the first and only of its kind. Now that we've gone back almost 400 years, let's go back just a few. In 2020, the United States government conducted the most extensive fear campaign of my lifetime. Our legal system screeched to a halt, allowing for gross despotism by governments across America. Churches were closed by the state. Gatherings were criminalized.
Adams, you need to kind of bring it back to the subject of the bill. terms like gross despotism make everybody a little itchy. Okay, so,
It should make them itchy, Mr. President.
okay.
I'll just finish this part. So in 2020, churches were closed, gatherings were criminalized, and society was divided into those who sought security and those who resisted a restriction on their natural rights. So now we move to the vaccine, 2021. The new vaccine comes in, untested. Complete immunity was given to manufacturers of the vaccine, ensuring that if anything went wrong, there would be no accounting for it. By executive order, businesses with over 100 employees were mandated to vaccinate their employees. And this was the first time that we saw the courts step in. They didn't step in when the citizens' First Amendment rights to peacefully assemble were happening, but by gosh, once the businesses, had some trouble, here come the courts. The mandate was stopped, but the perceived power that was now in the private sector was too great, and the executive branch encouraged them on. Many went forward with the mandate, causing great insecurity and placing citizens in a position that no American should ever be placed in. Take this vaccine or you're fired. I remember the phone calls pleading with us to do something. Do you? Now it's 2023. The job market is fine. And yet we have many of those same companies who were firing employees for not surrendering their sacred autonomy, and they're now asking us to train their new employees. By putting the Coronavirus Stop Act into statute, it ensures that the precedent of this kind of behavior does not stand in Idaho. We cannot build a wall of protection around every citizen of this country, but we have an obligation to do so for Idahoans. Citizens have the right to make their own decisions when it comes to putting things in their body. As far as I'm concerned, anyone can get as many COVID shots as they'd like. No employer has the right to make that decision for you, especially when using fear-mongering of the state and the coercion of a paycheck. That kind of business behavior is not healthy. It's not good for Idaho. Just want to touch on a couple of things. In my opening debate, I discussed how the courts didn't step in. Well, the law was unclear, and this clears things up, so we don't go down that road again. I wanted to quickly just talk about the two handouts that went around. So the first sheet is the First Amendment of the Constitution, which I discussed in my introduction. Just wanted everyone to see it. And the second portion is the statement from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky in 2021, where the CDC reported that infection resulted in similarly high SARS-CoV-2 viral loads in vaccinated and unvaccinated people, and that vaccinated people infected with Delta can transmit the virus. So oftentimes the best of intentions, right, don't always work out. I think the mandate experiment needs to be done in our state permanently. And so I would ask for your support. Thank you very much, Mr. President.